Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, if you don't mind, I would very much like to continue on with our journey, our exploration, and our discussion with respect to the recent releases made by the Criterion collection during this year of 2021. And that brings us to a film which is from 1975, and the filmmaker is Andrei Tarkovsky, and this film has been designated by Criterion with its new release this year at spy number 1084. Please pardon me for my poor pronunciation of the Russian language, but this is a film which is called Zerkola, or in English, Mirror. This is the work from 1975 from the artist and filmmaker extraordinaire Andrei Tarkovsky, and it stars, among others, in its brilliant cast, Margarita Tereshkova and Ignat Danitsev and Anatoly Solonitsyn, with voiceover provided by Innokenty Smoktunovsky. Screenplay credited to Alexander Misharin and Andrei Tarkovsky, with poetry by Arseny Tarkovsky. This is the work which is, and once again, please pardon me for my very poor pronunciation. The film is called Zerkola. It is also known in English as Mirror. Where to begin with the film Mirror? I think if we were to try to focus in on what could be said to be the plot or story essence of this film Mirror, I think we can focus in on a number of possibilities. So, from one perspective, it seems to be a story that is somehow or another a subjective representation, perhaps a type of cinematic means of expressing the subconscious, or another way to put it, a cinematic means by which to make objective what otherwise is the subjective experience of thought and feeling and memory, both in terms of one's perceptions of the present and one's surroundings within that environment of the present, and how certain feelings or actions or ideas, either external or internal, whatever the case may be, might lead us to think about or consider or contemplate or fantasize or lend life to memory vis-a-vis, for example, our own childhood experiences, whether they be real or otherwise, or whether they be contemplations or rumors or feelings or instincts, whatever the case may be. This film, Mirror, I think as an introductory statement, as it were, seems to be, from one perspective, the cinematic representation of this type of subjective experience from the viewpoint of what we understand to be the character or the person or personage, Alexei, who is, from a certain perspective or interpretation, could be a representation or stand-in or otherwise a cinematic expression of Tarkovsky himself. But that is also one of the great splendors of this film, is how this film is in many ways able to connect the seemingly intimate and minute and minutia of the intimate with a broad universal experience that I think arguably could be understood and sympathized by many viewers. In other words, the intimate personal details also give way to a universal appeal that can be understood by many, which is one of the great powerful points of this film. But focusing in on the character of Alexei and the voiceover and the way that the film, say in a post-war quote-unquote present-day period, seems to be dealing with stories or relationships with his ex-wife, played by Margarita Terkova, and also their son, and what they are trying to do or trying to work out vis-a-vis their son and his upbringing going forward as he gets older. And also within that story, within the post-war adulthood story, as it were, we also get images dealing with the son's interactions with time and space, with mysteries, and with the cryptic and enigmatic things that seem to be unexplainable or perhaps spiritual or maybe even supernatural, who knows. But also we get a sense of a contemplation, and that contemplation can take two fundamental routes, and each of these I think is very much inextricably linked. One is a contemplation based upon or triggered by or otherwise inspired by a sense of a yearning of trying to experience something of the spiritual and the glory that is the experience of the spiritual, a type of metaphysical exploration as well. That is one facet. The other facet, too, of course, is a contemplation upon the verge of death. And those two are arguably connected, but we see here within this post-war or quote-unquote modern-day story, from the vantage point or viewpoint, arguably, of this narrator, Alexei, who could also, in terms of an interpretation, be Tarkovsky himself, and also via many interpretations could be us as well. In any event, we see these interactions and dialogues and various episodes dealing with a kind of present, if you will, a storyline. So this is one area where this film operates. But of course that is not all, because we also understand that the film visits or revisits or represents or somehow captures within the cinematic grammar of Tarkovsky's universe. We have moments or fragments or memories that seem to represent a kind of past, and a past that is maybe from the childhood days, 1930s or mid to late portions of that particular decade or era. And this involves a number of things. It involves the mother. It involves the children, and we understand too that children are representations of the family and the childhood upbringing and growing up of the narrator, main character, as it were. So we have already ideas of childhood memory and relationships between parents and children. I mentioned parents. Of course, there is the image or there is the representation, whether idealized or not. There is the representation in these childhood or past memory episodes of the film Mirror of the mother and what she does, who she is, how she interacts with the people that she knows, again, via this subjective representation that is arguably from the viewpoint of the son. And so we have this mother-son dynamic. But I mentioned parents because there is also the dynamic of the father and his presence, or should I say non-presence. And we understand too that if we were to remind ourselves of the links that this film has, Mirror, Zerkala has, arguably, with the certain biographical aspects of the life of Andrei Tarkovsky himself, that we can begin to understand, for instance, by experiencing some of the Criterion Collection supplements that are included with this release of the film Mirror. I think we are reminded of the fact, for instance, that Andrei Tarkovsky's father did leave the family during his childhood in the 1930s. And we also understand that that was to join the military, but there were also perhaps certain subtleties or complexities that such a move might have been reflecting vis-a-vis the relationship between husband and wife. and parents and children. And we also understand too, based on close associates and friends and colleagues of Tarkovsky, that this was a very big blow to him. This was a very shocking moment to him and to his family. And so it is, I think, very conspicuous in terms of the artistic expression that we have of the childhood memory sequences of the film, that we have a father who is mostly absent. However, this is another great indication or another brilliant aspect of this film Mirror, because this is but one of many possible interpretations in terms of focusing in on the story. So we have childhood experiences or memories or dreams or visions or fantasies regarding the past vis-a-vis the present. And the way that these are intertwining and interconnecting within the scope of the universe of the film itself and beyond is utterly captivating and mind-blowing. For example, the way in which past and present seem to be intertwined is expressed in, for instance, the actors and performers who are involved in each of these components. We see, for instance, the same actor who is portraying, for instance, the ex-wife, as well as images or the moments of the past in terms of the mother figure. And this is Margarita Terkova in terms of her performance or dual performance. Or is it a dual performance? Because when we recall or remind ourselves of the possible interpretation of this film being a subjective viewpoint made objectified by, I'm sorry, let me restate that. When we understand the possibility of one of the interpretations of this film being a type of subjective experience through the objective way that cinema can capture the subjective, then we can realize that maybe this is somehow or another a looking back through the lens of the present. In other words, recalling images of one's past, but relying on people or fragments or images that are closely associated with our present, and using those in order to fill in what we otherwise have in terms of gaps in our own memory or experience, or the way in which certain actors portray dual roles might be very subtle or perhaps even quite a direct representation or metaphorical type of examination as to the psychological landscape of the main character, narrator, in the present day. After all, one of the things that we mentioned earlier in terms of the present day story is the idea of contemplation via cinema of, for instance, contemplation of the spiritual and also contemplation upon the verge of death. And when you have those two possibilities, I think there are many possibilities too in terms of a psychological or an emotional examination of the character from whom the subjective viewpoint is expressed. And in other words, maybe this is a means by which certain feelings of guilt find expression and also find a sense of salvation or solution. Maybe this is a type of resolution in terms of an emotional difficulty. We understand too in the context of the story that this is one of the key components is the discussions between with the ex-wife, played by Margarita Terkova, about their son and their upbringing. And so, and the absence of the father in the childhood memory experiences has, I think, arguably a type of parallel or mirror type of relationship in terms of expression between past and present. And so maybe this is the narrator's way of trying to make amends. Maybe this is the narrator's way of trying to somehow justify or glorify in a positive way those figures or those people that he knows and surrounds himself with in the present, and somehow giving voice and light to those memories of the past. And also perhaps this is a suggestion too of the closeness in terms of what he regards as the past and how that closeness is reflected in the type of closeness he might feel in the present, and two, the type of thing that happens in terms of an examination of one's life at the point of death, or on the verge of death, or upon thinking that one might die, how one regards one's life at that point, and what that means in terms of our views of what lies beyond and the spiritual. So this is a very convoluted way on my part, I admit, of trying to express, in essence, the idea that this is, from one point of view, a type of subjective experience made cinematically concrete. And in that cinematically concrete expression, we have the possibility of an emotional and psychological exploration given voice through metaphor and image and sound, and also the use of actors in arguably dual roles, but perhaps also giving voice to the idea of not just the psychological examination, but also perhaps a treatise or a statement, if you will, on the nature of memory and the nature of how the mind works, how it seems to go from past to present, how things in the present trigger something of a memory that we might suddenly recall, and that floods into our mind. And when it does so, we cannot help but also rely upon these markers or these signals of the present in order to give voice and focus to those memories, which are, of course, ephemeral and hazy and oftentimes foggy. And so we need that support mechanism, perhaps. So this is perhaps one of the viewpoints or one of the perspectives of the film. This leads to yet another, what I would suggest to be another a possible way of viewing this film, in that it is not just, or one way to look at it is this type of subjective viewpoint made cinematically concrete in objective terms. But related to that is also the idea that this film, arguably, is also a type of really direct and perhaps even fundamental reflection of how, say, the operation of human consciousness in the creative space, or perhaps in the space of contemplation, shall we say, in the space of thought. In other words, this film and the way it interweaves a type of dream logic with images that are both intimate and universal, with mysteries and enigmas that also could lead the viewer to his or her own space of memory and time and experience. This film seems also, therefore, to be a type of representation or a cinematic expression, or a almost statement, if you will, as to how cinema itself can, in essence, be an expression or representation of the means by which human thought operates. In other words, it seems to, in other words, be an expression of human thought in this, I think, fundamental way, a cinematic representation of the operation of human existence, or one of the facets of the operation of human existence, made flesh in terms of the very real and specific experiences of our narrator, of Tarkovsky, and the filmmaker, in terms of the specific biographical elements that we understand are part of the film. So that's another way of looking at this, I think. It's not just a subjective viewpoint, but in fact also an expression or statement that cinema can also be capturing the essence of the operation of human thought. Related to that, too, is the way in which a work of art can itself be a type of method or mode of contemplation of the infinite and the universe and God and the spiritual and what lies beyond. This is, I think, very important, too, because there are so many moments in this film that can be described as being mysterious or without explanation. For instance, examples of nature, the bird being able to fly to the hand or the head of the young boy, or the idea of how water or wind travels through a particular space of woods or a room, or the idea of fire and smoke, and how the plumes of smoke seem to flood and fly through the air in this mysterious, ethereal way that is beautiful. And it's hard to put into words exactly why we might think it is beautiful, but there is a beauty and a type of instinctual way in which we look at these images. We're not quite sure what they mean or why we might feel the way we do, but we do feel the way we do when we watch them. And so this is, I think, an expression of the mysteries of life and the mysteries of existence and the mysteries of the universe. And what another way to put that is contemplations of the spiritual and contemplations of God and the boundless universe, as it were. And so the idea here is the artist Tarkovsky is giving us an expression or a cinematic contemplation of the spiritual and the infinite. And it reminds me of a statement that is found in one of the supplemental materials. This is Andrei Tarkovsky, A Cinema Prayer. And there's a statement there which is, I think, describing Tarkovsky, and I think it can be applied to this film Mirror perfectly. The idea of the artist touching the ground on the one hand, and then pointing to the transcendent sphere with the other. And so the idea how the film or the filmmaker is engaging with a type of exercise, a metaphysical exercise in examining or contemplating the boundless infinite and the spiritual by using earthly and gritty and physical things, i.e. the tools of cinema. The use of the tools of cinema in order to create a contemplation that is expressing the infinite. This is, I think, the very power and essence of a film like Mirror, because it does show the essence of the mystery using these physical terms of nature and wind and earth, but to give us a sense of the scope and the depth and the beauty of that mystery, and indeed the hint or feeling or instinct that we as viewers may have in terms of why we feel that way, what is the answer to the mystery, indeed what lies beyond. This is, I think, one of the great perspectives upon looking at this film Mirror in terms of a cinematic expression of a contemplation of the spiritual. And also, I mentioned earlier how this film has this wonderful ability to tie into or to make parallel or to indeed create a mirror between the minutiae of the intimate and the broad-scale nature of, say, the sweep of time in history. This is also a very important concept of the film Mirror, because we also see used in very skillful ways throughout the film. For instance, documentary footage, for instance, of the Spanish Civil War and the people who were affected by certain events relating to the Spanish Civil War, including, for instance, shots of children, random shots of children who seem to be caught in their private, intimate moments with their family or with their friends, and then they are caught on camera for forever. And this leads to other things too, the balloon flight in terms of an expression of technology, and also a reminder of the frailty of humanity, if you will. And this reminder also finds voice in other expressions of documentary footage usage, such as the soldiers in Crimea in 1943 and Lake Sivash. And then also expressions or shots of documentary footage involving the Chinese-Russian border conflict. And so with Zhenbao or Damansky Island. And so these, I think, historical contexts that we are also privy to when we watch the film also provide a sense of layering, or they create a type of intact connection between the intimate and the sweep of the history of a particular nation, a particular people, because we understand that the pain and the recognition of human frailty is constant. It exists on one level and exists on the other level, and thus it means that whatever happens to one particular person or one particular human being happens to us. And indeed, we see the effects of history vis-a-vis the specific story of Mirror in terms of past and present, pre-war or the wartime experience, having the effect on the children that we meet along the way, training exercises, weapons, etc., and how that affects their relationships or friendships, if at all. So this is a very, I think, in terms of a plot-wise connection, a very concrete connection. But also, if we take a step back, we can realize that the story on a minute, intimate level is also the story on a grand macro level. The sweep of time and history affects the intimate stories of each individual. And even where we see documentary footage that represents these very important landmark and in some cases quite shocking events of history, they are also reminders of how these moments of history, the grand sweep of time and space in history, are also moments that are occupied by human beings and individuals, each with their own stories, such as the individual human stories that we find with our narrator, the stand-in for Tarkovsky, Alexei, and his mother and the children that we find at the center of Mirror. The individual experience is made flesh. The individual experience is connected to the entirety, the sweep of history, and thus the universal level. And thus, what that means as a possibility of viewership is when one watches Mirror, one can see the story of this particular person or these particular people, but also the possibility of how, as we watch it, we can also see reflected in this film bits or feelings or fragments or rumors, or maybe even so much more of our own stories. And those stories being what? For example, how we might feel our connections to the earth and to the sweep of a history where we find ourselves, for example, how we relate to loved ones or spouses or former spouses, how we relate to parents or children, how we relate to friends and neighbors, how we relate to each other, and how we relate to ourselves, not just ourselves in the present, but also ourselves in the past, and what that means in terms of the sum of our own total experiences as we remember them or recall them, and as we are reminded of them when we watch along the story here, as we watch the film Zerkala, or Mirror. So this is, I think, my way of trying, and I admit it is a very convoluted and terrible, shaky way, and I apologize for this, but it is my way of trying to suggest that this is many, many levels, many facets of the film, many possibilities of viewership or interpretation. And I say many levels or facets, but in fact one might also say that it is not just multifaceted or multi-leveled, it is everything at once. It is everything at once. It seems to be expressing so many aspects of the human condition at once. It seems to be telling us in dream logic, but also in harsh, realistic terms, both in terms of the fantasy elements, but also the earthy elements, as well as the documentary footage elements, the idea of rumor, time, history, fantasy, memory, childhood experiences, the emotional landscape, psychological landscape in terms of, and how that is reflected in how we and how our minds operate and how we remember and recall things of our past as they are triggered by events of the present. And what those triggering events might be for us, it depends on our own viewpoint and our experiences, of course. But we see them manifest in the context of this story, Mirror. And thus, it reminds us of just how powerful and how captivating and how truly beautiful viewing experience of this film is, and how it creates this sense of an all-encompassing experience that is also very quiet and very emotional and very spiritual and very powerful and very intimate and also very mysterious. And it grants us answers, but also brings us more questions. And that is one of the great trademarks and hallmarks of brilliant cinema. This is Andrei Tarkovsky's work, Zerkalo, also known as Mirror. The Criterion Collection has released this film, Mirror, Zerkalo, by Andrei Tarkovsky, at spine number 1084. This is a brilliant release for a number of reasons. First of all, it is presenting the film with this new 2K digital restoration with uncompressed monaural soundtrack, and it is a very great presentation. And we also have a number of supplements that accompany this particular presentation of this film. There's a lot to talk about here. First of all, this is the Blu-ray edition, and this Blu-ray edition has 2 discs with it. The first disc has the film itself, and it also has a feature-length type of exploration or meditation documentary from Andrei Tarkovsky, the son of Andrei Tarkovsky. And this is called Andrei Tarkovsky, A Cinema Prayer. This is from 2019, or it's described, or it was premiered in 2019. It is approximately 1 hour and 41 minutes. And this is a wonderful documentary for many reasons. First, I think it can serve as a type of meditative primer, if you will, on the life and times and filmography of Andrei Tarkovsky, because it focuses in on certain aspects of what might be said to be thematic concerns that are very prevalent within the filmography of Tarkovsky and how it reflects his own life as a human being and as an artist, and how that is reflected in each of the films that is part of his filmography, starting with Steamroller and the Violin, and then going into his other works, Ivan's Childhood, and then Andrei Rublev, as the early components of this documentary meditation, and talking about, for instance, how these films might be reflective, say, for example, of the earlier works of his of the value that he placed in his cinematic expression vis-a-vis the viewpoint of the child, or the perspective, the child's perspective. And this is also reflected in, say, a film like Mirror, because there are very wonderful, beautiful, ethereal, mysterious moments within Mirror as an example of the child's perspective on the world, and on these moments of the wind, and viewing the wind, and seeing the mystery of the darkness and the wind, and what that might mean or not mean in the context of one's life. And so this perspective is one aspect that is highlighted as part of a voyage through, or contemplation or meditation through, each of his works. And also another aspect of that, when we get into films like, say, Andrei Rublev, is the idea of the power of art and icons, and the contemplative nature of them, and the inherent spiritual nature of these contemplations and examinations. And this is also a very important aspect that we have seen, not just in the context of Andrei Rublev, but also in the context of Zerkalo or Mirror, and also in the context of other films that are discussed in this work, Solaris, Stalker, etc., Nostalgia, Sacrifice. And so this is a very excellent examination, as I say, a meditative primer into the life and times and filmography of Tarkovsky. It is also a almost loving tribute in terms of the legacy of Tarkovsky, the cinematic legacy, but also the legacy, the humanist legacy of what Tarkovsky left behind, because we have the way in which his films speak to societal concerns dealing with Russia, dealing with the nature of, say, say a nature of, say, freedom or lack of freedom and also the way in which there's great importance placed on the idea of the expression of the human soul and the human spirit. I mean, at one point in the film he says, art is prayer. And this is a very powerful statement because it's suggestive of the fact that cinema itself, the inherent importance of cinema itself, is the act of, or the ability by which cinema gives each of us, in terms of the filmmakers and the viewers, voice in terms of what it is we want to feel and express. And so I think this is at the very heart of what it is that makes cinema so powerful. It is what it is, indeed. And so the idea of a spiritual meditation or contemplation given voice through the means of cinema. This is, I think, a great tribute to the humanist element of the importance of Tarkovsky, and also indeed a type of a reminder of just how much Tarkovsky's cinema is a type of statement, if you will, on the value and importance of cinema as an art form. So these, and for these and other reasons, I think this particular work, again found on the first disc, Andrei Tarkovsky, A Cinema Prayer. This is so worth checking out, so please check it out if you can. That is not all, because as I mentioned, we have 2 discs in this Blu-ray edition. The second of such 2 discs has a number of other supplements that are worth checking out as well. So the first of these supplements is called The Dream in the Mirror, approximately 53 minutes, and this is described as being from 2021, Louise Milne and Sean Martin. And this is, in essence, a type of examination, maybe a making of documentary as well, the life and times of Tarkovsky in the context of Zerkala, or mirror. This is essential. This is so essential. It goes into, for example, these biographical details of Tarkovsky's life, growing up, Yurovets, and his childhood, his father leaving the family when he was very young, and how it affected both him and his sister, and also his mother, and what that meant to the family dynamic, what that meant to Tarkovsky's own psychological state of being, as it were, and how that is very much reflected in aspects of this film, Zerkala, or Mirror, in a number of ways. First of all, in terms of the, for the most part, absence of the father figure, but also in the presence of the poetry that is included in this film. Now, we have to remember, too, that the poetry is by Arseny Tarkovsky, the father of Andrei Tarkovsky. And so, in fact, when we see these images of the childhood past, or the memories, where we see the mother, say, for instance, the mother walking through the woods towards the house alone, when we see her alone, we are reminded in visual terms that there is no husband there. The father figure has left, or is not there, or is absent. But, those are visual terms, but in terms of what we hear the words of the poems of the father. Now, this is a very interesting and strange and wonderful dynamic, because what it means is there's an absence, but that absence is, I think, given voice in terms of the poetry of the real-life father of Tarkovsky, and that also creates this paradoxical way of making the scene even more conspicuous by the fact that the father is absent. And so that makes for very complex viewing indeed, and this is commented upon here in this documentary as part of the example of the comments on Tarkovsky and Mirror and Zerkala. And so they make reference to some of the poetry, for instance. And again, this is the English translation of the of some of the poetry. But for instance, where we see shots of the mother walking outside towards the house, we hear the poem, and it's translated into English as follows: "We celebrated every moment of our trysts as an epiphany, alone in all the world, lighter and more daring than a bird's wing. You skipped down the stairs, leading me, dizzy, through moist lilacs, to your kingdom beyond the looking glass." This type of reminder of it's shown in the documentary here is very powerful, because it shows us just this type of almost meta level interplay between what we see on screen and what we hear, and also what we understand Tarkovsky's life to be, and also we understand that these are the words of the poetry of Tarkovsky's father, that it in many ways can be said to be even talking to the cinematic version of his mother. That is very, very mind-blowing. And so this is an example, I think, of how this documentary, or how this work is very, very important, very helpful in terms of a further understanding or reading, or possible providing of possible other readings of this film, Zrcalo, or Mirror. There is also the idea, or some of the interviewees are sharing with us some of their interpretations of what mirror is. Some people think of it as a type of expression of a dream, relying on dream logic, and that is certainly one component of the film, but is also reminding us again of the use of, say, the documentary footage, reminding us of the importance of this in the historical context of Russia, but also in terms of the way in which this footage is used as a means also of capturing the individual humanistic moments that make these historical events as powerful and as significant as they do, because the events of history have significance in the way that they affect individual lives. And so this is, I think, a very powerful reminder of that. And also, as I say, or as I was trying to suggest earlier, this is also a means by which, or one of the means by which this film seems to be suggesting that the universal is linked with the individual and the intimate. So this is another, I think, great way that this documentary explains some of this background and explains some of the reasons why this is very significant. And why the integration of this footage is really consistent with, say, the spirit of what Zrcalo or Mirror is. So, and also it's the documentary or the work speaks a little bit towards the critical reception of the film versus the public reception of the film. Now, this is also very fascinating because the work reminds us or indicates to us about how so many people, when this film was released, so many people seemed to take to this film very, very strongly, and how it seemed to be for a lot of people, it seemed to be telling their story as well. I mean, it was a story about Alexei and arguably about Tarkovsky, but when people were watching this film, they were reacting to it in a way that it seemed to be reminding them of their own lives. Now, that is a very powerful means by which this film can leap or jump from the context of what it's presenting within the framework of the film, the story of Alexei, the mother, the father, or the ex-wife and the son, etc. But how that leap into the lives of the viewers is a very powerful one indeed. So for this and other reasons, I think this work, The Dream in the Mirror, is so worth checking out. So please check it out if you can. It's approximately 53 minutes. And that's not all, because then we have a work which is called Islands, Georgy Rerberg, which is described as being from 2007, a Russian TV documentary, 52 minutes. The film, Mirror, or Zrcalo, is also a composite or a collaboration between or among many artists, Tarkovsky being one of them, of course, but another of those artists that is collaborating to create what ended up becoming Mirror is the cinematographer Rerberg. Now, this documentary is focusing in on this very powerful artist and this very important artist, talking about his reputation as a student, and also his reputation in terms of the context of Mosfilm, and also how people regarded him as being a genius artist from very early on, and how he spoke his mind, and how he was very much able to, at least in the context of a lot of films that he was making, including his work with Tarkovsky, how he was able to try to challenge the artist in order to get at something better, for lack of a better phrase. And so this is a very, very powerful documentary, very informative documentary about a figure that is very, very crucial in the filmography and career and art of Tarkovsky. Now, we understand that because of the context of Mirror. Also, there is another film by Tarkovsky, which is called in English Stalker, Now, there is a very complicated relationship dynamic that occurred between Rehberg and Tarkovsky in association with the production of the work Stalker. And it led us in many ways to a type of a breakup in terms of their relationship. And that is also touched upon and discussed in this particular documentary, perhaps maybe from the perspective of those who knew Rehberg and how it arguably affected him. But it also was a reflection of who he was as a type of artist, and how he saw the importance of expression of art in the ultimate way. And it resulted, of course, in this falling out between these two artists. But this is also something that is touched upon here in this documentary. So it's a truly fascinating work, and one should check it out if one has an interest in the works of Tarkovsky and also the works of Russian cinema during this period. Again, this is called Islands, Georgi Rehberg, approximately 52 minutes. And that's not all, because then we have a 2021 interview, one-on-one discussion, approximately 22 minutes, with Eduard Artemyev. And of course, he is credited as providing the music to this work. You also know him as having a rich and deep relationship, professional artistic relationship with Tarkovsky in the context of Mirror and other selected Tarkovsky works. Now here he is talking about his working with Tarkovsky and how there were some musical choices, say in Mirror, but also some of the other films that were involved. For example, Mirror, about the role of Artemyev as a musician, also as a type of sound designer. And we see moments, or we hear moments in the film, and these examples are specified by Artemyev in his discussion. It's a great discussion, by the way, about what his discussions yielded, with Tarkovsky yielded in terms of the result, the end result. Would they be these sort of use of orchestra sounds in order to suggest something of the mysterious or the frightening, or maybe the unearthly, or maybe even the supernatural, who knows? But there are those moments. Earlier in the discussion we were talking about how Mirror is expressing in many ways those examples of the mysterious or the inexplicable or the unknowable. And a lot of times in these moments we have the great musical motifs that are provided. For instance, there's a moment involving a room and the young boy and a woman who appears somewhat mysteriously in that room, and there's an association between that woman and the reading of a letter that was written from Pushkin to Chareyev. And so this is a very famous scene in the film because it is so mysterious and is so almost random in terms of how it appears and disappears. And this is an example too of how Artemyev's musical choices lend themselves or augment or embellish further the sense of heightened mystery and the unknown. It's a very powerful example. And so this discussion is so wonderful. And please check it out if you can. Again, approximately 22 minutes. And then that's not all, because then we have a discussion from 2004, and this was Alexander Misharin. Now, this film, Mirror, Zerkala, is credited, or the screenplay is credited as being by Misharin and Tarkovsky. And here we have a discussion, one-on-one discussion with Misharin himself, approximately 32 minutes. This is really great. He talks, for instance, about his how he met Tarkovsky, and there is a certain sense about how his life story had certain overlap with Tarkovsky's life story and how they bonded through that and other means, and their common love and devotion towards the art and medium and writing, and how that led to them working together. For instance, there are some episodes involving Misharin and Tarkovsky, and for instance, the film Andrei Rublev, and then leading to the situation involving the story genesis and working together of Mirror or Zerkala, but how certain circumstances led towards the next film instead being Solaris. But then came the return or the possibility of making Mirror again, and so the collaboration found voice once again. This is so fascinating. Misharan is as the interviewee, as the person giving the discussion. He is so direct, and there's this personality, force of personality that is charming and very pleasant, and also there are moments of humor in his discussion, and he's very detailed in terms of what it was that he felt, certain disagreements that he might have had with Tarkovsky or other certain artistic temperamental things that might have come up, etc. All in all, very, very exciting, excellent discussion with Misharan, who's a very key figure in terms of Tarkovsky's works, and also specifically in terms of Mirror. And we will get to one of those reasons when we get to the booklet as well. So, but please check out this interview if you can, approximately 32 minutes. And then also we have further interviews, this time with Tarkovsky himself. These are shorter and excerpt types, both from 1978. The first being from 1 p.m. News, and this is French television, approximately 4 minutes. And it is, he is being interviewed, and he is speaking about how this film is an autobiographical film, and about how cinema is a type of telling of the absolute truth. I really love that phrase. And the commentary in terms of or connection between cinema and poetry as a type of worldview. This is a very fascinating, almost a philosophical component. It's hinted also elsewhere, but it's the idea how certain artists who work in certain fields of art, like painting or music or cinema, they are all, each in their own ways, they are poets. Poets of painting, poets of music, poets of cinema. And so the worldview, the common point, the commonality among the artists, according to Tarkovsky, is poetry. Poetry as worldview. This is fascinating. This is so fascinating because also it reminds us about this link between the arts. And indeed, when we see Mirror, we are reminded, for instance, of certain images or recollections of images of icon art. There's also recollections or references made to, for instance, Da Vinci. And I think in one of the discussions, I think it's Artemiev in the Dream in the Mirror supplement on the second disc, where I think it's he who mentions about how, in terms of the artistic temperament of Tarkovsky, in terms of why for example, the references to Da Vinci were included in the film Mirror. It was, I think, from his point of view, it was the idea of how the viewer may or may not necessarily understand specifically those precise references, but the viewer will always understand, at least in some fundamental instinctual way, some kind of feeling or recollection or rumor about the echoes of other art forms that might have existed prior to cinema. And I think that is a very powerful statement. And I'm reminded of that again here in this interview with Tarkovsky, again for French TV, the idea of poetry as worldview, and it spans the entirety, the gamut of art forms. Great stuff. But that's not all, because we have a second interview as well. This is the first one being, dated January 17th, 1978. And then the second interview, this is Nord-Pas-de-Calais News, dated January 25th, 1978. So a few days later. And this is approximately 3 minutes. Again, he is telling us or letting us know his viewpoint on cinema as art, and also making reference or reminding us about how this is corresponding to, I think it was the release of the film Mirror or Zerkala in France at the time, again in 1978. So these two interviews, I think, are exceptional and well worth checking out. Please do if you can. And that is it as far as the presentation and packages or the supplements are concerned. So 2 discs in this package. I should point out, as we do with these Criterion releases, this is a great release with this Digipack Digipack presentation, which means it has this cardboard outer sleeve like so, and then the inner compartment like this with the discs that are included. I should point out too that I've taken the liberty of removing the booklet, which would go in here. The booklet is very thick, very robust, excuse me. I love it like that. And I'll talk about the contents of the booklet in a moment, but the booklet is so big that it barely fits. If you put it in, pack it into the Digipack Lite, so it barely fits. So it tends to be a little bit bulgy, but that's okay. That's okay, at least from my vantage point, because it's a reminder of the wealth of info and writings that we get in the book. Speaking of which, this is fantastic. It is how many pages is this? This is 88 pages. 88 pages of pictures and writings and information about the presentation and casting credits, etc. This is amazing. This is amazing. So, first of all, included with all the great photographs are a number of writings. What are those writings? First is an essay called All is Immortal by Carmen Gray. This is fantastic. This is fantastic. Please check it out if you can. Please read it if you can. Ideally, maybe after one has seen the film Mirror, because there are certain details that are revealed or discussed in this essay by Carmen Gray. All is Immortal. It is excellent. Excellent, excellent, excellent. Please check it out if you can. But that is not all, because I spoke about one of the supplements on the second disc, the discussion with Alexander Misharin, and his screenwriting collaboration, his writing collaboration with Tarkovsky. And lo and behold, what do we get here but English translations of Confession and A White, White Day by Andrei Tarkovsky and Alexander Misharin. So these 2 writings, we understand, form the basis or the type of screenplay or scenario or novel format screenplay of what ended up becoming the basis, arguably, or we understand the basis or part of the basis or part of the writing structure fundamentals upon which the film Mirror was made. So we are getting, and these are English translations. So we have Confession, which is almost serving as a type of scenario type of writing, but it is so much more because there's so many great details that are embedded in that. And then also A White, White Day. And so we have here a type of a novel or novella approach to the story, but written also with very interesting, intricate details interspersed throughout. So this is so fascinating and illuminating. There are so many details that emerge, so many little turns of phrase or little words that are spoken that I didn't pick up when I heard them, when I watched them. I'm not saying that everything is reflected 100% between what is written here and what we see in the final film, but it does lend itself to maybe certain details of examination that someone like myself, who is not an expert in this field of history, can look at and try to maybe do a little bit of research on, etc., to see what it means. In other words, it gives me the ability to further enhance, hopefully, my own understanding and appreciation of the basis upon which the film Mirror was eventually made. So I am so grateful for the inclusion of this. This was, I read it over twice. I will probably read it a number of times after this video is completed. This was so fascinating to me. It served as a type of reminder of what the film was, things that were the same, things that were different, things that were revealed, things that weren't, the film going in similar directions or different directions. This is fascinating. So, wow, such great reading, such a great time. And another great example, another facet from which one can further examine the work Mirror Zrcalo. So these are excellent, 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 excellent features. And so please check it out if you can. This is a fantastic release. I am so thrilled with this. In terms of how the film is treated, what we're given, and also the film itself in the Criterion Collection. Another work by Tarkovsky, an important work in that, not just important, not just iconic, landmark stuff in terms of what it is telling and the context of the film, or I'm sorry, the position of the film in the context of Tarkovsky's filmography on the one hand, and also as a type of statement regarding the reach and scope and power and capabilities of cinema itself. This is Tarkovsky's work, Zerkala, or Mirror. Okay, my friends, so that's it for now. And so until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well, and please keep on watching a lot of great, great movies. Thank you so much, as always, for your time. I very, very, very much appreciate it. Stay strong, stay safe, and cheers.